Welcome back from lunch, everyone, to the Disability and Telehealth Conference sponsored by Stanford Medicine, Stanford SMATI, and by the American Telemedicine Association. I'm Malathi Srinivasan. I'm a clinical professor here at Stanford as a reintroduction, and I'm a South Asian woman with mid-length, dark curly hair, brown eyes. I am wearing a black dress, a pink jacket, a really oversized gold necklace, and I have kind of a cream background behind me. My co-host today is Dr. Polis, who I think is still at break. He'll be back in a few minutes. And we're really pleased that I can't believe it. We have 1,000 people, over 1,000 people who've registered for the conference, who are here with us right now from over 50 countries and all over North America. So everyone, welcome back. And I hope that you found this conversation as useful and as interesting as I have today personally. And I've been very moved by everything that we've been learning about the deep needs of persons with disability, the bright spots and the public good that telehealth has been in terms of access, and really how far we have to go to create the systems to be able to support telehealth and high quality care for all persons with disabilities so that no one is left behind, for the 1 in 4 Americans that have a disability. And it is over 25%. So I'm so glad that we're all in conversation here together. The next step in our conversation is really to bring together leaders in technology and in health systems. And we're going to have just a wonderful hour talking about technology and really bold solutions for thinking about what accessible telehealth can look like and what industry and health systems are doing to be able to make care better for everyone. And I'm going to introduce the session lead for this session, Dr. Christopher Sharp, who is the Chief Medical Information Officer at Stanford Healthcare. He's actually a friend and in my division. He's an internal medicine physician like myself. He's also a physician leader in the application of innovative clinical technologies for the delivery of care. He's really accountable for integrating and transforming all of the health technologies to promote the best kind of clinical care experiences and clinical outcomes for patients at Stanford Healthcare. During the pandemic, it was through his leadership that we were able, within 2 months, to go from 5% telehealth visits to over 75% telehealth visits to safeguard patient safety in the outpatient primary care centers. And it was just tens of thousands of encounters that we had to change over. It was a massive, massive endeavor, and he brought to bear the entire health system to make that happen. So he also has a responsibility to ensure that clinical information systems work well for clinicians and that clinicians are proficient and really effective in their use of these systems in the care of their patients. So he drives clinical strategy, design, enhancement, usability, adoption, and workflow, and integrates all of this into a seamless whole for all of us here at Stanford. He maintains a very active primary care practice and also is attending right now on the wards. He just took off his white coat, having seen his new team of patients and residents and students. And he's published multiple academic articles on the impact of clinical informatics and safety outcomes and clinical wellness. So he serves as a mentor and an educator here for our clinical information informatics fellows and junior faculty, for myself and for all of our other trainees. So welcome, Topher, Dr. Sharp, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce the rest of the team.
Thank you so much, Malathi. Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the many members who've put together such a fabulous conference opportunity today. My name is Christopher Sharp, but the last half of Christopher is Topher, and you may hear that used today because that is what I am commonly called. I'm a Caucasian male in my middle age look. I'm clean shaven, blue eyes with glasses. I have short blonde hair with some gray highlights. I'm wearing a white shirt and a blue checked jacket and coming to you from an office. I'm so excited to be talking with the leaders that we have on the call today because there is no telehealth without technology and without the application of that technology in really meaningful ways. Uh, we have leaders from technology and healthcare technology joining us today who I hope will really dig into the imperatives, the challenges, and also the groundbreaking solutions that really can enhance telehealth accessibility for all people. Today, I think we're going to explore big tech's role in driving innovations and addressing the unique needs of patients with disabilities. This session aims to spotlight some of those bold strategies and collaborative efforts that can bridge the gaps in healthcare accessibility by ensuring that telehealth services are accessible, equitable, and inclusive for everyone. As Malathi mentioned, I'm a practicing physician and very much interested in how we apply these technologies into our healthcare delivery. I'm super excited now to spend a moment going through and making you introduced to who is actually on the call with us today. First, we have Roy Schoenberg. Roy is the president and CEO of Amwell, which is a provider of telehealth services and platform solutions. Since co-founding this company with his brother in 2006 and taking it public in 2021, Amwell has become one of the world's largest digital networks, helping patients, clinicians, and payers welcome a new world of tech-enabled healthcare. Outside of Amwell, Roy is on the advisory board of the MIT Sloan Health Initiative, the Brigham and Women's Hospital Center for Patient Safety Research and Practice, the American Heart Association Telehealth Board, and Modern Healthcare has repeatedly recognized him as one of the 100 most influential people in healthcare. Roy is a former American Telemedicine Association board member, and the organization has recognized him for his industry leadership. He continues to see innovation in digital care as his calling, holding more than 50 US issued patents in this domain. And Roy also holds a medical degree from the Hebrew University and an MPH from Harvard. So welcome, Roy.
Thank you so much for having me here, Topher.
I'm going to go ahead and just introduce the other members and then ask you to each speak some more, but thank you, Roy. The next is Gary Sorrentino. Gary Sorrentino is the Global Chief Information Officer of Zoom, a product which needs no introduction, as a global communications platform. Gary is a former managing director of JP Morgan Asset and Wealth Management, and Gary was global head of client cyber awareness and education. For over 12 years, Gary was the Chief Technology Officer for JP Morgan's AWM's Global Technology Infrastructure Initiatives, where he managed its data privacy program and was responsible for infrastructure, application, and end-user technology production support. In 2014, he assumed a new role as the lead for their cybersecurity efforts and developed a firm-wide Protect the Client cyber program designed to raise cybersecurity awareness among employees and clients. With almost 40 years of experience in information technology, Gary has served in various other global and national IT leadership positions in firms across the financial services industry. Welcome, Gary.
Good morning. Good afternoon, I should say. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Rajiv is a physician researcher on the health team at Apple, which I will introduce as the technology giant. Rajiv works across a variety of internal and external research endeavors to support Apple's health features. He practices patient care and teaching as a faculty member here at Stanford Children's Health, where he was formerly a medical director of mobile health. Dr. Kumar completed his BS at University of Illinois and his MD degree and pediatrics residencies at Loyola University Chicago. and also his fellowship in pediatric endocrinology and diabetes here at Stanford University. So welcome, Rajiv.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. At this time, what I'd like to do is offer each of you a moment to introduce yourselves further. If you would, maybe you could highlight your role or your view on the role of industry in telehealth accessibility and any key learnings you want to make sure that we dig into as we speak during the hour. I'll go in the same order, and Roy, if you don't mind, to start in.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for having me here. Just to start, I'm Roy Schenberg. I'm about a little bit over 50-year-old Caucasian man. I have black hair, big glasses that I desperately need to see anything at all. I'm wearing a white shirt, and I come to you from what looks like a blurred office in the background that is basking in sunlight from a very rainy day in the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts. I think that kind of sums it up. Again, thank you for having me. As Topher said, I'm the CEO of Amwell. I used to be a clinician, and I kind of turned to the dark side and started dealing with technology almost exclusively right around the corner of when we started Amwell, and had the idea that delivering healthcare through technology may actually be beneficial to some. It's been a while. But I think that even the starting days of Amwell have been really based on the importance of establishing accessibility. Many of you don't know, but our first customer back in millions of years ago was Blue Cross Blue Shield of Hawaii, that made the decision to introduce telehealth-based care to the people of Hawaii because of the geographical reality of Hawaii. A lot of the healthcare is in Honolulu at in one of the islands, and many people live in other islands, and they had to fly people back and forth. And against a lot of, very, very, I would just call them aggressive negative sentiments in the medical community at the time to the delivery of care without being next to the patient physically, they have decided that access to healthcare, even if it is done in a different way, is better than no access to healthcare at all. These were really early days, and you need to be that draconian in order to get something to actually operate. So at the time, this wasn't about the telehealth experience for people with different disabilities or challenges or whatever it is. It was the fundamental of, to get healthcare to people, you actually have to begin to use technology. Because of that decision, a lot of the regulations around the practice of healthcare in the state of Hawaii had to be changed. And within a couple of weeks of the launch, the state Senate of Hawaii completely rewrote the rules around the governance of medical practice in order to allow telehealth to happen. So that to me was an example, a profound example of what happens when the notion of the importance of access is communicated the right way as a matter that affects the well-being of people. Just another point that I think is also very relevant, a little bit more than 10 years later, COVID came into play. And all of a sudden, clinicians actually needed to get access to their patients to not only render their clinical duties, but also for many health systems that live off the ability to submit claims for healthcare. They needed technology to provide that access. And almost within a couple of weeks, the rules and regulations around state licensure limitations, around payment models, around what can be done legitimately through telehealth have been completely rewritten because, again, there was a public need for access. And the thing that is probably the most gratifying about, this session that we have here today is that if you think about it, it really captures a full circle. We used to fight all these years for telehealth to be accessible to the people. And then we stand here in front of you because telehealth has become a foundational channel by which healthcare is delivered to the people. And because of that, now comes the very legitimate conversation of not how telehealth increases access, but rather how we can actually make sure that telehealth itself is as accessible to every part of our population, because it is a fundamental part of how people should experience and are experiencing healthcare. So this is an incredibly gratifying opportunity to be here, and especially with such a star, group on the panel. But I look forward to the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Roy, thank you. Terrific that you're opening up the comments about what has changed so much drastically and been enabled, also what some of the threats and challenges are around regulatory or other constraint. But I would love now to turn to Gary Sorrentino. And Gary, if you would also tell us a little bit about a little more about yourself, about how you see the role of industry in enabling telehealth and making it accessible to all.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me. I am also a Caucasian male, a little older, plus 60, enjoying a full head of gray hair. I have on a blue shirt and a dark jacket. I have on a dark pair of glasses, which I really do need to even see these videos, with tinted lenses right now due to the studio lights, and a blurred background and of a home in northern New Jersey. We see telehealth as a key solution in advancing any health equity, but by providing that kind of access to very much underserved populations. And we think this is particularly important when it comes to rural areas, as we've discussed, where specialization can be very, very limited. By leveraging these digital platforms and mobile health technologies, we're working with healthcare providers, and how are we going to help them reach a broader patient base and ensuring that people are receiving what they deserve: timely and effective care. So we believe this is an important segment of healthcare, but not enough is being done right now to support patients with accessibility challenges. The industry players, us plus others, it is a partnership, need to be constantly thinking about how they can make telehealth more accessible, reliable, work with the challenges of the patients. Being an end user company, the patient's needs, the end user's needs are constantly changing. And as we all talked about, there's differences in legislation all over the world. And being a global company, we have to deal with those legislations and I heard today there are many, many, many countries on today. So we feel our role is to provide that platform, right? To utilize all of our native features, but more about our integration into those technologies so we can help support people who have these accessibility needs. Great examples. So one of the examples we have is we're actually working with a company that has a telestroke program. So it's beyond primary care. How can we get into providing advanced medical care? And this is how they can assess a patient that presents in a rural facility. And I think one of the best examples of this, we're also working with the digital hospital in Riyadh. And that is their primary concern. When their patients can get to these rural locations, a centralized location that can assess people and offer advice into the local, I want to call them hospitals, but I'm sure some of them are just local locations where people can go. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot working in this space. And I think a couple of key learnings can probably put down to, it's about strategic planning. But I think on top of strategic planning, which means we have to think through these solutions, but we have to think through solutions that we're able to change very quickly. The patient's needs are going to change very quickly. And as most of us know who have been in technology, sometimes technology doesn't actually change overnight. And I think we need to change that. We need to figure out how can we be more adaptable and how changes can change the pace based on any circumstance. Integration. We talk about integration, but sometimes it's not always seamless. And it needs to also be thought about in a broader sense. It's just not integrating how we people connect, maybe how we hear, how we see, but also does it connect into records? What's the full solution? And so we're really focused on working with our partners about how do we handle that technology integration that provides that end-to-end solution. We also work very much with patient education and engagement. A goal is educating patients also on how these accessibility solutions are actually available is very important. And not just the normal care, is how can they engage in a better way? Being a tech company, infrastructure and support. How can we make it so that support is reliable? There's nothing worse than a critical infrastructure or a critical solution or a telehealth service when it breaks in a rural area. And that could be anywhere from actually the internet to whatever local connectivity we're giving to people or whatever devices we're creating in the future. I think we're also always looking for the experience. Zoom's all about user experience. And, how can we help allow patients get, whether it's the patient or maybe a little further, maybe the family, maybe the caregiver, but shouldn't access just be maybe through one button in the future? How do we make that so much easier? And I think it's also about ensuring equitable access through some of the initiatives that will address digital literacy, probably even affordability and that overall access. So with Zoom, we want to provide that reliable platform, but we want to continue to work with technology partners. And at the beginning, we were talking about what happens after today, after we talk today. Well, I think really after today, it's really companies like Zoom, platforms like Zoom, working with technology partners to how do they help us with the next last mile? Some of us can provide the whole transport, but it is going to take a union of partners that are going to be thinking out of the box about the end user's actual unique needs and how they can connect to transports like Zoom and platforms like Zoom to deliver this overall solution.
Thanks so much, Gary. And thanks for keeping the lights on our conference as well, by the way, to your team on Zoom. That's really very, very helpful and obviously a very broad context for your comments. Rajiv, I'd love to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself as well and your opening comments here.
Sure. Thanks, Topher. I am a mixed ethnicity male in my mid-40s. I have thinning brown hair. It's pretty short. I have a fair complexion, blue eyes, a graying beard. I'm wearing a buttoned-up blue shirt and have AirPods on. I'm in an office where the lights keep shutting off because I'm standing perfectly still. And there's a gray wall behind me as well as a frosted glass door in the background. I'm honored to be part of this panel, and the folks here represent different aspects of the telehealth user experience. And so together, I think very, very different insights and different aspects where we can come together and provide more perspective. Apple's role here really is providing the operating systems across the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac, where developers make the apps that are often used for telehealth or sensors that might be sharing data relevant for telehealth. We have a developer relations team that works with any developers who are developing on our platform, and we make a number of APIs or tools that are freely available for developers to include in their apps across vision and hearing and mobility and cognition. Additionally, and critically important, we work to empower users with their health data. It's their data. They know themselves best, and they should have access to it and be able to control it, of course, with great respect to consent and in a privacy-preserving manner. But we strive to enable that and to put users at the center of their health and the center of their care. As Topher shared, I'm a doctor for kids with any hormone imbalances, including type 1 diabetes. And there's not that many of us as pediatric endocrinologists go. Some states have maybe one or two. And so before telehealth, families, kids, and their parents or guardians would drive 3+ hours each way to see me. Often, missing school, missing work, incurring costs, dealing with parking lots and waiting rooms and all of that for these 25-minute visits every 1 to 3 months, really with the visit focused on downloading home device data so that we can better inform insulin dosing before the next visit. And so pretty onerous to get data to us. About a decade ago, through technology, including Apple's Health Kit, we were able to start to get access to data from users, from patients with their permission, by having these tools on mobile devices that allows one to control which data they share with which apps. And so, for instance, now instead of requiring someone to come in person and plug in a device and get a CD-ROM and download all the data and print out sheets of paper, now seamlessly we can get home glucose data from finger stick monitors or continuous glucose monitors right into our electronic health record. That dramatically decreased the burden for telehealth, whereas telehealth was sort of something we wanted to get to. It took the main barrier away, and so that really changed our care model. Not only that, we were able to see the data more seamlessly and actually in between visits, making it easier to and more efficient to provide care and achieve tighter glycemic control or glucose control. Again, that was a decade ago. Things were pretty slow after that with regards to evolution in telehealth, as many in this audience have experienced. But there's significant advances during the pandemic, and I think many of us are here because we want to see those continue to evolve and not regress. Here at Apple, we've heard of tremendous use cases from folks all over the country and all over the world of people using home data to facilitate telehealth. So, for instance, decreased readmission rates for folks admitted to a hospital with a heart attack and going home with a Bluetooth scale and blood pressure cuff and an iPhone. Other stories include better surgery preparation and outcomes for seeing mobility metrics and otherwise before and after surgery, and even just home programs for titrating medications for hypertension or for diabetes, just by having those more frequent data points to be able to provide care and titrate the dose between visits. So yeah, definitely inspired, excited to be here. We know that the path to telehealth has been uphill, largely gated by reimbursement policies and otherwise. And so post-pandemic, we want to see those policies not regress or not go backwards so that providers are still incentivized to provide excellent care in between visits and to enhance the user experience for our patients. So thanks again for including me on this diverse panel and this diverse conference where we get to speak about cool stuff.
Fantastic. I would like to jump in with a couple of questions, but also want to prompt the audience, the broader audience, to think of questions. Feel free to drop them into the Slido channel, and we'll be looking for those as we go. Can I start actually by keying off a point that you made, Gary, which is this concept of the end user experience being so critical, and that plus digital literacy of enabling the end user. I wondered if I could ask each of you to share maybe an example in the disability community of something that you might think is, say, well, a little hidden treasure, a little Easter egg, or something that you would say there are real success stories out there that you would like to make sure others are aware of. And then likewise, or if you have a comment about something that you know is a real challenge for a community with disability, recognizing that disability has a great deal of variation, of course, across the broader communities. Any thoughts on that, Roy?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Where do I start? There are so many things that you learn once you start listening to your audience rather than just reading the regulations. We serve a lot of payers, we serve government and, a lot of health systems. So we are very familiar, and we deploy WCAG and many of those others, that need to be there. But then when you bring telehealth to the masses, then you hear stories that are remarkably different. You hear a patient who has Parkinson and has tremor, and you know that when you have to put your password into a website, usually the password field is masked. When you enter the characters, they show up as stars, and that's in terms of protecting someone's privacy. But for someone with tremor, they don't know if they keyed the right keystroke. So if it rejects their password, they don't know why that was the case, and then it gets locked up. These are things that you would never, ever imagine. People with cognitive disability, we all believe in the things like two-factor authentication, right? It's the saving grace of security here. For them, the exercise of doing two-factor authentication between two different devices and copying something that they got on one device to the other makes it completely an impasse for them to come in. So I think that we are, as telehealth becomes vastly more popular, we get direct understanding of all the different challenges, and they go very, very far beyond a lot of the different standards. I also want to make a side comment that in our experience working with a lot of organizations that have their own way of certifying their products, you would think that the fact that there is a standard solves the problem. It's a little bit like HL7 used to be for those of you who are in healthcare. And it turns out that when you deploy, you confirm a standard and you get another company to audit what you did, it comes up with a different conclusion every time. So we're still at the very early stage of the maturation of the strength and clarity of those standards. But the one thing that I would say is maybe a nugget, as you said, of what we've learned. We try to make our systems comply and support any type of disability that we become aware of. I can tell you that that's always a challenge because the economics of trying to satisfy every dimension of accessibility that you want to implement in your product is quickly becoming prohibitive, to the point that as a society, we have to ask ourselves, if we make products so expensive because they comply with everything, you end up having less products and less choice and less evolution. But what we try to do is we always try to think about, are there ways to allow people to have access to the services without breaking the bank, without creating yet another challenge for people to even afford it? And maybe the one thing, and I'll be very, very quick about it, is that we found sometimes the solution is not trying to make one system perfect, but rather allow a very easy transition of the user from one system, one chassis that they use to another in order to better access the service. A simple example would be, obviously what we do is highly audio-visual engaging. It's audio-visual by nature. The ability of a patient to say, that actually doesn't work for me, I'd rather move into an audio channel only, or I'd rather move into an asynchronous chat only, with the advantage of a lot of the capabilities that companies like Apple have built into their Safaris and devices. The fluidity by which people can choose the different chassis in which they use the same product has actually really created a lot of ease for a lot of patients. So this is not high technology. This is just thinking, on your feet in terms of what you can do to let people get into their comfort place that helps the challenging access. Just an example.
Thanks, Roy. That's really important. Clearly, if you have a diversity of users with a diversity of abilities or disabilities, we need to be able to open up the kind of user-centric choices and choice points as you're referencing. Gary, if I might sort of shift the question slightly as we're talking, I'm curious to know more about the regulatory either constraints or enablers that you're finding, especially on a global scale. How does regulatory interact around your ability to provide great services to those with disabilities in either a helpful or a not so helpful way? Oh, and Gary, I think you're still on mute.
I should know how to use the platform better than anybody. But I think from a regulatory standpoint, I'm still waiting for helpful. I think a lot of times they do put up artificial barriers, and where we are trying to deliver something, as my colleague said, in a very simple way. We should be able to see commonality across the platform, and the experience should be better. But then there comes complexity, and then there comes cost, because in certain countries, you have to keep certain data certain places. In certain countries, you can't export certain data. In certain countries, certain data is considered confidential, and in other countries, they're not. I had the same thing when we were in the banking environment. Is what is PII? What is this kind of rule? What is important to the user as data and privacy and compliance come into place? So I think, look, it would be great if we could have one standard. Right? We could deliver solutions. They would make it easier for us to deliver solutions across the globe, because there is one patient. But at the end of the day, depending on where they're physically located sometime, there are different standards and there are different rules and regulations that we have to abide by. And that does add complexity. That does mean that certain things can be provided in certain countries where we can't provide them in other countries. So I think it would be great if we could figure out a way to, at least in this case, helping people, if we could just make common things, have things very, very, very common, where the complexity doesn't mean I have to change the technology. We see a lot of people doing different endpoints for accessibility all over the globe. However, some solutions can't work in different places. We might have a great solution that can be used in one country, but can't be used in another. And I think those have to change, because at the end of the day, we're missing focus of what it is. Yes, security is important, and my background dictates that I understand about security. However, we should figure out a way to step back and say, but what trumps that? Where can we get to using those kind of solutions around the globe? Because the greater good is making sure people get access to primary or secondary care that they need, rather than worrying about this is acceptable in one country and not the other. So I think what happens is, for a lot of the third-party developers, and all of us depend on third-party developers, they're closer to the actual person. They understand some of the uniqueness a little better. They're specialists in what they do. But sometimes they hesitate because they know that whatever they're creating might be limited by regulation, might be limited by geographics. And so I think that's one of the things, that we can get over that part and we can see a more broad use of some of these creative ideas that are coming out every day. I remember I did something with one of the other colleges, and they were talking about something for speech to braille. I thought it was, I went through the presentation and I thought it was an incredible device, probably would have invested myself. However, the person who was presenting it also presented challenges when it came to legislation and different country problems with it. And that his target market area was very, very limited because of something he was doing that wasn't acceptable globally. And that's just a shame. And I think those are some of the things that we're working with people to see, how can we get through that? How can we make it so that people can have access to what they need, regardless of where they are?
Thank you, Gary. That's a really provocative comment to me about these third-party solutions, as you describe them, that are really these more localized endpoint solutions. When you think about how you can specifically meet the needs of an individual with a disability, it's certainly my impression that often you really need to know a lot about that disability and what are the different kind of compensating or enabling tools or capabilities that you want to bring to that individual, and kind of how you bolt together these big platform enablers with those endpoint solutions that really are sensible. That really resonates a lot and is very, very interesting to think about that from a global technology standpoint. I will say that for telehealth, one of the challenges you've talked about, regulatory constraint around data, there are clearly regulatory constraints as well just around practice. So, international practice being even more complex, sometimes just across state lines, having significant complexity, even when the platform or the technology very easily spans those gaps. Rajiv, can I turn to you as well? I'm very interested in this maybe pursuing on Gary's comment about kind of the different technologies that connect all the way through out to the individual and be able to help them in this, especially in the setting of a disability, and how they can find the right enabling technology for them. How does that work come from Apple's perspective, which has a very broad idea about user engagement?
No, it's a great question. I think we have the opportunity to see a lot of developers, see them develop and work across these different platforms and try to make their apps as accessible and reach the maximum amount of people as possible. And we see a lot of the limitations they have in their development, often from resources or understanding how the different pieces fit. And so we find ourselves trying to understand what those blocks are and then lowering the barriers such that each individual developer doesn't have to do that. And so, for example, if you want your telecom platform or telehealth platform to work with hearing aids, previous to Apple's MFI program, that would be sort of individual connectivity or one-off kind of builds. Once the MFI program came or made for iPhone and made for iPad, hearing aids now have an easy connectivity, seamless connectivity to our platform, such that whoever's developing on the platform then benefits from that work or benefits from that connection. That's one example, but there are many devices where we're looking to lower the barrier so that telecom connectivity is as seamless as possible.
I love that example, Rajiv. And I wonder, are there examples that you know of where that's not as easily resolved? I'm curious about examples that you might have come across either in your practice or, through what you've identified at Apple, where there are some pretty significant difficulties yet to be spanned.
I'll think through some specifics, but I think the barriers often kind of thinking of two categories, right? So there's communication modalities and then there's data modalities. So from the practice perspective, for instance, if I want to interrogate a device, interrogate means if I want to passively get access to device data from home, like an insulin pump, for instance, without some common language or some way to allow a user to be able to share that, then they ultimately have a pretty big task of connecting that device, getting the data in a usable form, somehow packaging that and sending it to me so I can interpret it securely. That puts a lot of effort on them and often will take 10 minutes of a visit just gone. And so encouraging more companies to make that data easily accessible through HealthKit or other modalities such that I can see it on my side. From a communication perspective, there are a number of devices, AAC devices and otherwise, that don't have that singular language or that singular form of connecting to a given platform. And so it kind of leaves each of those siloed. And so I think there needs to be bilateral effort to say, what are the gaps, what's missing, and how do we connect those as seamlessly as, for example, a hearing aid. And so I think it's just this bespoke technology that is not quite as seamless.
Thanks, Rajiv. I want to emphasize two comments you made. One is I really appreciate the framing of communications technologies and data technologies. I think it's often we think that telehealth is only what you see on the screen. I know that Roy has shown me that Amwell doesn't think of it that way. They think of it as the data that really represents the patient's interaction. And that is much more rich, as you point out, and much more enabling as we have many new capabilities or technologies that individuals could be using themselves that could inform the care. It may be an enabling technology that actually helps to support a disability that can also inform the interaction at the same time. And that's a really fascinating way of thinking of telehealth as a much more broad context. We're getting a little bit down on time, so I wanted to ask, based on a question that's coming out of the Slido, I wanted to ask a little bit about partnerships. The comment that's in the Slido is that there are many people who have needs for supplies, medications, other items where costs become very significant. You've referenced, you as speakers have referenced the cost of producing these technologies to be able to meet the broad set of needs. And so I wondered what about how you approach partnerships, with communities such as disabled persons communities to be able to say, are we hearing you right? Are we prioritizing right? Are we working through the challenges of costs as you're approaching? So maybe, even though we only have a few minutes left, I'll ask each of you just to speak briefly about, like, how do you engage in partnerships? How do you reach out to communities? How could communities reach out to you? Roy?
Sure. The quick answer is that you have to experience it yourself. The first thing that we did is we created our own teams inside Amwell, broad teams of not only engineers and people that write software, but we have a large clinical networks with a lot of providers and support staff. And we ask the folks that are close and in our home to surface their challenges from using our own system. And they were able to really describe or raise attention to things that we never thought about, like the ones that we just talked about. But I do want to highlight the one thing that kind of keeps us up at night. Telehealth has become a major avenue by which people access healthcare. This was not the case 3 or 4 years ago. It is very scary to think about what will happen with digital divide when you think about how lack of access to telehealth will further create negative effect on people that need healthcare the most, because telehealth, being an accessibility product, is actually utilized, and we actually see the numbers, is actually utilized at a higher relative frequency by people that have trouble leaving their home or have trouble actually utilizing a lot of services that are available physically. And if they have trouble accessing telehealth, you're going to get kind of the logarithmic impact, negative impact on healthcare, just because telehealth is utilizing technology. The last thing I want to say very quickly is that we talked about, and a couple of you also mentioned integrations. Telehealth is no longer a standalone application. It is built into patient portals. It's built into EHRs. It's built into iPhones and other different instrumentation. We always think that if you solve a problem of accessibility in a single product of telehealth, you solve the problem for everybody. The reality is that all of the steps along the way to get healthcare have to solve all of the different accessibility issues as well, and they have to solve it in the same way so that the path of a patient from point A to point Z is actually going to be accomplished. And that's a much more complex, much more sophisticated, much more collaborative approach that we all need to do for, to get to a better place.
Roy, what a great example of the many partners that have to be touched in order to create a powerful and useful solution. Thank you so much. Gary?
Well, I mean, getting back to the original essence of the question, I think really the disability community can help because no one knows better what they need than they do. And co-developed solutions are really it's going to be the difference between success and failure. I think that's the way Roy said it also, is that we need people who are experiencing whatever kind of help they need, right? And with that, if we can help co-develop solutions with them, then the chances of those solutions, then technology companies can take those solutions and then make them more scalable and more bulletproof and more reliable, right? But I think that's really where the end comes is reach out. We're always looking to work with anyone who wants to work with us. About 40% of our enhancements come actually from our users. They understand what they need. They understand what they want. Isn't that the right way to develop?
Thank you, Gary. Love it. Rajiv, love for your comments as well here about how to make those connections in the product development, the services, and the partnerships.
I will give three very quick answers, but one is I think Dr. Skelton gave a great example earlier of using iPads at the VA. Health systems, folks that have need for devices often have unique needs. She talked about some of the security and some of the data exchange and otherwise. We have a health team that works with hospitals and systems to figure things out like MDM and otherwise to make the devices most usable for their patients. From a developer community, we have Feedback Assistant and others where you can easily get a hold of Apple to ask for specific development or help with development. And then from the community, we've had an email address for the past 20 years, accessibility@apple.com, where you can share stories or make requests. And there's multiple modalities, including sign language support and telephone services and otherwise, where you can make specific requests for development or things that you'd like to see improved or further supported. But I think, yeah, just talking to us.
Thank you for the specific recommendations, Rajiv. That's fabulous. As a practicing doctor myself, I am incredibly encouraged and excited, optimistic, really, by hearing what these very large, what you all represent as very large technology firms, how you think about products, that are accessible to everyone. Sometimes I sit in my office and think, how am I ever going to do this, right? How am I going to connect with this person or this patient or this person with these needs? I'm not sure if I'm really up to the task. And I am very appreciative that you all are working hard on helping bridge those gaps. Lots of exciting opportunity. I think we're just about at time, and I want to thank you again to this terrific panel. Thank you so much to SMADI and Stanford for hosting this terrific conference in conjunction with the ATA. And Malathi, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for a riveting set of thoughts. And I'm so struck by the idea of thinking about the greater good of accessibility versus security and really trying to prioritize where we need to be spending our intellectual capital and our physical capital as we're growing out these platforms to try to meet the needs of everybody. So thank you for being so thoughtful and so collaborative in this discussion. I'm hopeful that we can really get something great out of this conference and put together some ideas and best practice standards that will be useful for everybody.